So here's your icebreaker question for today. What does it mean to throw the baby out with the bathwater? What does it mean to throw the baby out with the bathwater? That's an old saying. And give an example. Maybe you have an example from your own life of where you saw something like that happen. Talk about that with your group and figure out that old saying for a minute. We'll dive into the scriptures in a moment. So if you've been following along, last week we had a pretty complicated set of scriptures to go through. We looked at how Jesus is a high priest, but not in the high priest like those who are descendants of Aaron, but instead Jesus is a high priest in the order of Melchizedek. You can go back to last week's study and dive into all the specifics, but the bottom line is that Jesus is a different kind of a high priest. He's one who is a priest and a king, which is good because he comes from a tribe that is not the tribe of priests, but a tribe of kings, the tribe of Judah. He is a priest who is timeless, like Melchizedek, so there's no beginning and no end, and that's good for us because that means he can serve as high priest and intercede for us for all time throughout all of history. What we see this week as we start to look at, wrap up that idea of high priest and move on to new concepts, is that Jesus is serving as a high priest not in a tabernacle or a temple that is here on earth, because the tabernacle here on earth was actually just a copy or a shadow of what is actually existing in heaven. When you read this passage, I just want you to take some time to think about that a little bit. If the tabernacle here on earth was just a copy or a shadow of what is actually existing in heaven, what do you think the tabernacle is like that's in heaven? The one that is the place where God dwells and all people see the very presence of God. And how, if Jesus is serving as a high priest there, how is his ministry far superior to those of the priests in the line of Aaron? Read that passage, talk about that a little bit. We'll continue in a moment. It's beautiful out today, and that's great because it's been really hot over the past few weeks, and so the temperatures have cooled down, and so I enjoy being outside in God's creation. But today is a kind of a windy day, and so it makes it a little bit more difficult to make these recordings because the wind kind of hits the microphone and makes noises. I asked the question about throwing out the baby with the bathwater because it's similar to saying I can't do these recordings outside, even though it's a beautiful day and I love being out in nature and making the recordings outside. I can't do it because there's wind. And so because of that one difficulty, I'm going to throw out the whole idea of making a recording outside. That would be throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I'm bringing that up because the passage that we're reading next is one that talks about how there is an old covenant and a new covenant. The old covenant that God had with Israel is one that if they will obey God's laws, then they will be God's people, and God will be their God, and He will be present with them, and will bless them as a nation, and all people will see them and be blessed by and through them. Well, God made those promises to them, and they didn't keep their end of the bargain. They did not follow God's law. They did not walk with God. And because of that, God let Israel split in half, and then the northern kingdom was destroyed, and then the southern kingdom was destroyed, and only a remnant of Israel was left, so that God's promise to Abraham would come true through a descendant of Abraham. That descendant, of course, was Jesus. You see, there was a promise that God made to the Israelites through Moses, and that was that promise that God would be their God and they would be God's people if they obeyed his law. Now what we see in the book of Hebrews is that God isn't going to show God's people anymore through the Israelites, that someone else is going to come and fulfill what was promised to Abraham, and then all nations will have the opportunity to be God's people. And so the next stage, the next phase, if you will, of God's plan kicks into place. Jesus changes everything. But when he comes, the old covenant, the agreement with Moses, goes away, and a new covenant, a new agreement is put in place. What you're going to find as you look at these passages, though, is that the new covenant still includes God's law. God's law was delivered to the Israelites through Moses and chiseled on stone. But for us, in the new covenant, in the new way of doing things, God's law is placed on our minds and our hearts directly by God. You see, we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We don't want to throw out the law with the change of covenants. God still says that right is right, wrong is wrong. God has a design for our lives, and that has not changed. Murder is still wrong. We still should not steal from one another. We should still love God with our whole heart, mind, soul, and strength, and we should still love our neighbor as ourselves. That has not changed. The law continues. But the law delivery mechanism changes from a stone tablet to our minds and hearts through God's Spirit. Read the passage there. Take a look at it and start to put those pieces together between the Old Testament and the New Testament in a way that maybe you'll understand a little bit better. That God has been trying throughout our entire history to get us to draw near to God and to walk with God. And the law shows us what it looks like to walk together with God. Read the passages, talk about the questions that I have there, and then pray for one another, that all of us will follow the law that God places on our minds and hearts, that all of us will walk together with God. Know that I'm praying for you, and that I'm grateful that God has woven us together in this way. God bless.